In this chapter, I'd like to address the issue of German cockroach management, and more specifically, the issue of German cockroach gel bait aversion. Now, as PMPs, we all understand how significant German cockroach control business is to the success of our organizations. German cockroaches are serious public health pests, and regardless of where you live or what time of year it is, German cockroaches are active, and the public needs our service every single day. Now, before we start to talk specifically about the things that we know about this gel bait aversion issue and things we don't, and how to deal with this issue in the field, let's take a little trip down the historical perspective on where gel bait aversion came from. The bait aversion issue that we're dealing with today is not the first time that this behavior has occurred in German cockroach populations. And in fact, MaxForce researchers first were notified and discovered bait aversion in 1990. That's quite a while ago. In this particular image, you see here a very good example of the behavioral reaction of German cockroaches that are averse to feeding on foods that contain certain components that they just will not eat. One thing I need you to understand, and this is just as true today as it was historically with the original aversion issue, is that this is a behavioral resistance. This is a situation that does not deal with insecticide resistance as we know it. Today, the current issue is a resurgence of bait aversion, which was first reported from the field in 1999. When we went to the field and started to work with our customers, what we found was that in accounts where German cockroaches were being controlled almost exclusively by gel baits for extended periods of time, populations had developed an aversion to feeding on at that time, the currently available cockroach bait gels. Now, common to most of these accounts, and again, this is an important detail for you to understand, is that they first started in food handling accounts, but we noticed or we observed very poor floor level sanitation, and again, this long history of, if not predominant, but almost exclusive gel bait formulation was the only material being used for cockroach control. This is a very good example of what we learned in our investigations in going to the field, collecting cockroaches from cooperating PMPs like you in real accounts. Here we see the level of control in German cockroaches when they're allowed to feed on then commercially available baits. This is a laboratory strain that has no demonstrated aversion to any cockroach gels in the field. You can see we got total elimination. Here we start to see field strains, and you can certainly see that as we go along, there are certain strains, certain populations out there which just don't eat these commercially available gels, and as a result, they're not controlled. Now, something you need to remember is when we look at this kind of data, if you're not above 90% control with your German cockroach gel bait efficacy, you're probably going to head for a failure. Now, as we began to respond and investigate cooperatively with our customers in the field, Bayer responded very aggressively to this issue. All right? We work very closely with the industry, and we still do today. We still pay very close attention to key cooperators in the field. We have gone out and collected many strains of German cockroaches from the field, not only in the United States, but globally as well. And we still maintain in our research laboratory in Clayton, North Carolina, right now about 30 strains of German cockroach that have demonstrated this gel bait aversion. The research that we're performing is continuing because we still don't know the exact mechanisms. You know, back in 1990, we were able to determine through some very difficult, very complicated research that one food component in gel baits was the cause or the trigger of this averse behavior where they wouldn't eat the cockroach baits. We switched a sugar, glucose, out of our original formulations, changed it with a new sugar, and that solved the issue. Well, today's gel bait aversion is much more complicated. It's a much more difficult issue than that. And again, at Bayer, this is one of the primary research projects globally for us in general insect control. And we continue to work very aggressively to find out the exact mechanisms of this behavior. Now, since 1999, after making multiple investigations in the field and continued testing in the laboratory, Bayer Environmental Science was able to develop MaxForce FC Select cockroach bait gel. Now, this was not a simple switch of ingredients as we experienced back in 1990. And in fact, we tested over 60 different recipes, both in the lab and in the field before MaxForce FC Select was discovered and formulated. You know, if you look at some of the issues that we had to deal with, you can understand why this was such a complicated subject. First, we had to develop a bait that would not only attract the averse populations of German cockroaches, but it would have to be equally as attractive and effective on normal field strains of German cockroach as well. We had to deliver the same kind of efficacy and the same kind of horizontal transfer or domino effect that you've come to expect from the MaxForce bait products. And we need to know that it attracts other cockroach species as well. We can't ask you to have 5 or 6 different cockroach bait gels in your arsenal. That's just not efficient. And in fact, MaxForce FC Select is just as effective on Americans, brown bandeds, Orientals, and smoky browns. So it's been a very successful launch in the field. Now, all of this research up to this point in time has been performed by Bayer, but we're getting validation now from outside objective sources as well. And I just want to show on this particular slide, this is a lead-in slide from a study done by Cheng-Lu Wang at Purdue University. Now we're seeing university researchers replicate the kind of initial field research that we've done as well. Now, one of the reasons we brought this issue up in this particular program is we want to address the fact that competitors are bringing out new cockroach bait gels and making claims that they're very effective and attractive on averse feeding cockroaches. Additionally, they're also making claims that their particular gels deal with insecticide resistance issues in gel baits and German cockroaches. And one of the things that we know at Bayer is that the concept or the issue of insecticide resistance is not the problem with this particular gel bait aversion. In fact, after years and years of collecting cockroaches, one of the initial things that we do to our populations is we always subject them to topical and oral applications of the technical insecticide. And not only the insecticides in Bayer's arsenal, but the insecticides in our competitors' arsenals as well. And we can tell you that in the issue of gel bait aversion, the label rates of all the insecticides that are registered in the gel baits that are out there, whether it's hydromethyl, fipronil, abamectin, boric acid, the label rates of these active ingredients continue to kill German cockroaches just as advertised. So again, I'll come back and re-stress that issue, that statement. This is a behavioral resistance, not an insecticide resistance. So one of the things that we've done at the research lab in North Carolina is we've performed this trial against 2 new cockroach baits that are on the market, Transport Gel and Matrix Gel. This was done in a choice feeding study in arenas where we subjected the cockroaches to all 3 materials. We allowed them to feed freely. After 24 hours, we measured the amount of consumption. This is strictly a measure of the bait that was consumed, all right? And in this particular data slide, we have 4 strains of German cockroaches. This PCNC strain is a field strain that is not gel bait averse. That is, it has no aversion to any of the gel baits in past history. The other 3 strains you see here, KA, CNC, and DTX, these are all strains of German cockroaches that have demonstrated significant amounts of gel bait aversion both in the field and in the lab. And in this study, we can see MaxForce Select in the blue bar is consumed consistently at high levels with all of the strains, whether there is gel bait aversion or not. Our competitors who are coming out on the market, both Matrix and Transport, just don't measure up, certainly with the averse strains. So what that means is claims that these competing gels attract gel bait or averse strains of cockroaches, we don't see that indicated here in these competitive feeding trials. In fact, here's a snapshot, if you will, of one of the arenas where the 3 gel baits are put down, MaxForce Select in the middle, Transport on the far side, Matrix close to me, and you can see the preference not only amongst certain segments of the population. We can see males in there, we can see nymphs in there. So again, it demonstrates that even in this particular population is one of the gel bait, gel averse strains. You can see that MaxForce FC Select is not only attractive to these German cockroaches, but it's attractive to all stages of this particular averse population. Furthermore, when we start to do mortality studies with FC Select versus these new gel baits, you can see a big difference, and I mean that's really where the rubber meets the road. This is the PCNC strain, not beta-verse. This is a field strain. We can see in a 14-day study, MaxForce FC Select offers significantly more mortality. Remember, if you're not above 90% mortality with your gel bait trials, you're going to run into issues in the field. The two new baits top out at about 70% mortality after 14 days. Now let's take a quick look at a verse strain. This is the DTX strain. You can see here that MaxForce FC Select was not only preferred, but it delivered total mortality at about probably 9 days. Again, matrix and transport lag behind, and even after 14 days, the best that we can get is about 62, 63% mortality with matrix, down in the high 30s for transport. So again, these claims just don't hold up in competitive trials. Now let's talk another little issue about gel baits. You really do need your gel baits to stay where they're put, and gel baits are most efficacious when they stay moist. Cockroaches prefer to consume foods that are very high in moisture. And what we did here is this is just a very simple aging study where we put down both a small bead and a small dab or spot application of a variety of gel baits on the market, original MaxForce, Matrix, Transport, and our FC Select. We allowed them to age, and this is on a surface called Cove base. It's the plastic sort of baseboard that we have. It's very common in commercial facilities. Show you what happens after 2 days. You can start to see changes in the physical nature of each bait, and already the Transport gel bait has literally fallen off of the surface. Either it's changed somehow or lost moisture. It doesn't even adhere to the surface anymore. Okay? After 10 days, not only is the spot application fallen off, but even the bead application has fallen off. That's significant to you because there's two issues here. Number one, the label instructs you where you can and cannot place your gel baits. And if gel bait is displaced in a situation like this, you may be in possible violation of label regulations. Secondly is the fact that if this kind of change, physical change is occurring to the bait, is your bait staying attractive long enough to kill enough roaches in your account to make a difference for your customer? Those are questions that you need to ask yourself, okay? Now, while we're on this slide, I want to also kind of point out real quickly, sort of a little tip for you when it comes to baiting for German cockroaches with gel baits. You know, we've demonstrated here two types of application, a bead and then a spot application. You may not be aware of this, but when you're in your accounts, I'd really like you to think about stop making these long, huge bead applications along cracks and crevices. And it's been very frequent in my time in the field with cooperators. I'll go into accounts and you've literally cocked the entire account with gel bait. Two things are wrong. One is that it's a horrible waste of product. Secondly, though, is that German cockroaches, when they approach this kind of deposit, this kind of application, the bead, if you watch them carefully, you notice that German cockroaches tend to congregate on the ends of the bead. And that's because German cockroaches like to feed not only from an edge, but they like to move around their food as they feed. And for this reason, spot applications are actually much, much more effective than long strips or beads. So what that means is when you're in an account with many, many German cockroaches and you need to use lots of bait, when you have to feed a large population, you'll be much more effective and it'll be much more economical for you to take your MaxForce gel and make multiple spot applications in those harborage sites rather than long strips and beads. What this means, let's kind of review real quickly about effective cockroach baiting. Let's kind of go over a few points. You know, over the last 7 years when we've been investigating this issue, I've had the luxury of spending a lot of time with you people like you in the field. We found lots of issues when it comes to you know, whether or not there's bait aversion in populations. I found that many applicators have not been taught the correct method to be very effective when it comes to baiting for cockroaches with gel baits or even dry baits like bait stations as well. But first, let's go over some basic fundamental aspects of gel baiting or cockroach baiting. First is you want to make sure you apply your baits directly into or adjacent roach harborages. And this graphic is very, very good for that. You got to think of your German cockroaches kind of like commuters. German cockroaches, in fact, most insects tend to be a little lazy. This is where we can kind of throw a little bit of human nature in you know, the mix as well. They will go only as far as they have to get their resources. So if you can bring cockroach baits directly into where they live, you'll be much more effective. So we want to make sure that you inspect, monitor, and then when you see where cockroaches are living, you want to aggressively put your baits directly into or as close as possible to German cockroach harborage sites as you can. Or if you can't find those sites, or if there's deep harborages, you want to make sure that your bait is placed between where cockroaches live and where they find their normal resource sites, sort of intercept them along their daily commute between home and work. You want to apply bait at points of entry both inside and outside the structure. And what I mean by that is, think of your account almost as a dynamic living thing. Once you eliminate your German cockroach population, you're always under the threat of new cockroaches being imported, typically on goods that come in, linens and produce and crates of canned goods and such. These areas are sort of high risk areas. Make sure that you maintain cockroach baits in those areas to intercept new cockroaches as they're introduced into the account and keep your conditions as roach-free as possible. And then finally, one thing I do want to bring up is our old friend here, and we've sort of forgotten about cockroach bait stations. I'm going to throw something at you that you may find a little difficult to think about, but we love cockroach gels. And in fact, if we look at the way that you people consume gels, out of all the cockroach baits, over 70% of the baits that you apply are gel baits, and you can understand why. In a way, putting down cockroach bait stations, it's a little passive, it's not as exciting. We all love our gun, and one of the things that's very personally satisfying, I know for many of you, is when you go into your accounts and you make those applications, you feel that you're physically doing something. You place that MaxForce bead down, or that spot down, and you watch German cockroaches come out of that harborage site and feed on the gel. It's a very gratifying experience. But one of the things you need to understand about gel baits is that they are most attractive when they're fresh and they're very high in moisture. Now, what I'd like you to start to think about is when you've gotten great control, when you've initially crashed that population by aggressively putting down sufficient amounts of MaxForce Select cockroach bait gel, when you really start to turn into the maintenance mode, I'd like you to start to think again about our old friend, the MaxForce bait station. The reason for this is that over time, as baits age, bait stations will outperform gels. And what that means is when we slip into that maintenance mode, when we've done the initial work, clean out, crisis, and complaint with our gels, with our moist food, when we really get into that maintenance mode, when there's no cockroaches there, but we're always worried about new cockroaches being introduced, the MaxForce cockroach bait station will really hold up the business for you over prolonged periods of time. MaxForce cockroach bait stations are labeled to be effective for 1 year or until the bait is totally consumed. So it's a good investment in those high-risk introductory areas to place MaxForce cockroach bait stations to give you long-term protection. Now, another thing that you might find a little unusual for a bait guy to talk about is this sort of concept of what we call combined arms in cockroach control. One of the things that we've learned through our exercise in investigating the cockroach gel bait aversion issue is that much of this behavior may be attributed to relying strictly on one formulation for cockroach control over extended periods of time. If you go to a college class on insect resistance, one of the things that they teach you about is this process called selection. If you constantly confront a pest population with the same type of control measure, the same type of control method, eventually you will select for individuals that have some kind of mechanism inside them biologically to survive what you're doing every single time you try to control them. This is probably what we've done with this gel bait aversion issue. So there's nothing wrong with starting to bring back, we use the term older formulations, but that's probably not a very, very complimentary term. But bring back other formulations of insecticides into key microenvironments where they're very, very effective. We can combine the application of baits with other formulations such as dusts, liquid residual sprays, okay? Even other kinds of formulations, aerosols and such. What you need to do, though, to be effective at this is think very, very carefully about the microenvironment in which your cockroaches live, in which you need to treat and protect. You got to think about the surfaces that you're treating. We'll address this issue in another chapter when we talk about insecticide formulations. Think about the environmental conditions, heat, moisture, air movement. Also, you have to think about the aspect of safety and odor. What's the implication of using certain kinds of insecticide formulations? What's the impact on your customers' health and well-being? And always we have to consider cost. Some of these applications may be labor intensive. They may be labor intensive in the short term, but if they pay off for you long term, they may be a very good investment.